Welcome to this episode of the AEC Engineering and Technology podcast dedicated to helping engineering professionals find technology that fits their needs. In this episode, I will be talking with Joseph G. DiPompeo, president at Structural Workshop, about the critical role of technology in building inspections, the impact of new inspection mandates across states, and important lessons learned from the Surfside collapse. And with that, let's jump into today's episode. Okay, it's now time for conversation of the week with Joe. Welcome to the show, Joe. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot to cover today with some very popular and interesting topics in the world of structural engineering and inspection. So we'll jump right into it. But first, Joe, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your path to becoming the president of Structural Workshop?
Sure. I after I finished school, I went to work in a very small company, and I think the last question you want to ask me, I think, is going to come full circle back to this. But I was very lucky to work in like a 4 or 5 person company with the founder of that company was in his 70s at the time and still working, and I got to work hand in hand with him for about 5 years, and I felt like I got 20 years of experience on top of that. I felt like I could not have gotten a better education, undergrad and grad school, but also could not have felt more like I had no idea what I was doing when I started. So that mentorship piece is incredibly important, and I was blessed to have it so well done and so intense up front that I had an opportunity. I didn't see a future with that company for various reasons, but I had an opportunity where I didn't have any major bills for a few months, which is a nice window. The hardest part about starting a business is, how do you do that and still make a living? And that transition part is really a difficult part of starting a business. And I had a set of circumstances where I had about 6 months where I didn't have to pay a mortgage or car payment or any bills. And I knew it was a limited amount of time. And I knew that was probably my best chance ever to start a business and go out on my own. So I took it. And, when that 6 months was up, now I needed to pay bills again. So I really had no choice at that point. I was too far in, So it's been 20 and a half years at this point. And we grew to about 15, 20 people at the height of the COVID money raining from the sky years. We've shrunk a little bit at this point, but I've got 3 offices and it's, other than the last year or two, which has been slow, it's been a nice, steady and growth experience, and it's wonderful. There's days that are wonderful, and there's days that are terrible, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it. So
the ups and downs in any business.
Yeah.
But Joe, as we were talking, right? So inspection related work keeps making up, say what I think is like a larger and larger percentage of what you guys do at Structural Workshop. But could you talk about some of the recent changes in building inspection requirements, particularly, right? New Jersey, the New York City metro area, Florida, and what are the critical updates that property owners and developers need to know?
Now, historically, as you know, the building code told you how to build a building, told you how to inspect it as it was getting built. Basically, you got your CO and turned the key, and that was it. The building code and most jurisdictions and regulations really did not care after that point. They did care about fire and carbon monoxide and a lot of other things that can also kill you, but structural safety was not ever really a thing, with some few exceptions, which we'll talk about. But so we had a lot of buildings, condos especially, where the board would hire us, we'd tell them what was wrong with the building, and they'd file that report somewhere and say, we got our report, but, nothing would ever happen. You'd have situations where a board decided to fix stuff and the condo association voted them out because they didn't want to pay the assessment, and a new board came in on the platform they weren't going to assess anybody, therefore nothing got fixed. And the problems continue to get worse. And this is something that I've been talking about for years and seeing. And, unfortunately, when taken to its extreme, we see what happened in Florida and at Surfside. So now, granted, that is still an extremely rare thing for a building to collapse in the middle of the night out of nowhere. That's, bless you. In America, that almost never happens. I mean, we could probably count a few on our hands because they're famous news stories when it does happen. In other countries with less stringent requirements, occasionally it happens, but I mean, that really never happens. So there's no necessarily epidemic of this happening. You have to get beyond so many fail safes and to such a point where that would actually happen. But the right combination of things happens, and that's the end result. So New York City has had what's called Local Law 11 for 20-something years, and that's the facade inspection ordinance. There were, for those people not familiar with New York City, especially Manhattan, it's just skyscrapers everywhere, every inch of every block for the most part. And even if they're not skyscrapers, there's not many buildings less than 10, 20 stories in the heart of Manhattan anywhere. So there was incidents where things were falling off facades and killing people and injuring people, and they enacted this local law to require facade inspections. So we had a little familiarity with that being in the area. And then one or two counties in Southeast Florida had some requirements, which, as we see everything that's developing out of the Surfside collapse, we're hearing a lot about what those requirements were and how they were enforced and whether they were properly enforced. We know they had their inspections, but not much happened after that. So there was a few exceptions, but for the most part, once a building was built, that was the end of it. So after Surfside, Florida went statewide with a similar inspection mandate that Miami-Dade and Broward County had. And then we got some things up here, Jersey City, New Jersey, which also has it's sometimes called the sixth borough of the city because it's right across the river. It's closer to most of Manhattan than Staten Island, Queens, and the Bronx and Brooklyn are. So, there's a lot of tall buildings and a lot of brownstones and older masonry structures. So they enacted a facade inspection ordinance, and also on the bigger buildings, a full structural inspection ordinance. So that's been about 2 years. Cliffside Park, New Jersey had a facade ordinance. Hackensack, New Jersey had a parking garage ordinance that predates Surfside. And New York City started 2 years ago with a parking garage inspection program similar to Local Law 11. Every single parking garage in the city, and there's thousands. I mean, that's not people that aren't familiar with New York don't understand the scale of it. But just the first cycle that just ended was only the lower half of Manhattan, and there's 400 garages that didn't file. That's just the amount of garages in one half of one borough that did not get the reports filed on time. So the amount of, when I say parking garages in New York, that's thousands. And they also enacted this year a parapet inspection, totally separate from Local Law 11. Every single building with a street-facing parapet in the entire city of New York. That includes brownstones and row houses, which there's tens of thousands of in the outer boroughs. They all need to get their parapets inspected annually. So there's just a tremendous opportunity from a business perspective. But, and I'm not a huge fan of over-regulation, but these types of things have the potential to injure and kill people. So if there is a place for regulation, this is it.
And Joe, and I think we kind of work in very somewhat similar businesses here, and going to Local Law 126, right? The New York City DOB is very serious, right? Even requiring a separate licensure, QPSI, qualified parking structure inspection.
Which they also have for Local Law 11. There's a qualified exterior wall inspector.
Yep. So QEWI for Local Law 11 and QPSI for anyone interested for Local Law 126. In addition to for Local Law 126 in New York PE, or being a PE or a registered architect for the facade inspection. So all that to say, these jurisdictions are taking these laws very seriously. I can even speak. We just did one. It was like a 4-stall garage, right? Something, a little thing that you wouldn't even think would be on the radar, but is taken very seriously by these entities.
Right. Well, one of the problems, and I think we're going to see something on this line with Surfside when they come out, but one of the issues is a lot of these garages in Manhattan are the basement and sub-basement of a 50, 60, 70-story building. And if you lose a section of the slab, that's bracing a column in the basement, that is a almost guaranteed collapse if you double the height of a column that's, got 60 stories on top of it. So, one of the issues is this is not so much about, having some spalled concrete and damage on a floor that, you might have a hole in the floor. It's not so much about that. I think it's more about, a section of slab collapsing and losing the bracing to the building and the whole building going down, which considering how tightly everything's packed, that's going to affect other buildings also, probably take down half a block. So they're taking it so seriously that they've been, and I don't mean this in a bad way, it's just a little bit of a pain for us, but they've been changing as it goes. Like this first round of reports that was due in December, initially they were actual reports that you sent the report in and then you had to go and file it and pay, and then they put everything on DOB now. So the reports I had generated had to be redone and put on, and then they changed the rules to how the annual inspection now has to be done in addition to the full cycle inspections, and they changed the checklist in the middle. So I had to keep resubmitting before you get approved. We're starting to get a bunch approved now. We're learning too, as is DOB, and you have a bunch of different inspectors, plan examiners, so they all have a little different standard. So I've had some things approved by someone that weren't approved by somebody else, even though it was the same document, and which is fine, as long as everyone understands we're all trying to figure it out, and we'll get it right for the next round, which we have. But they're taking it serious enough where they're tightening the standards as we go.
And Joe, going back to Surfside, it's like what key lessons do you think the engineering community learned about building inspections and structural safety due to the Surfside collapse?
Well, I think the enforcement of the repairs that need to be made. The big reason that a lot of these repairs don't get made is funding. So the part of this we're not talking about, which I'm actually doing a seminar on Wednesday next week at a trade show for condo boards in New Jersey. And it's we didn't even talk about the New Jersey law. New Jersey enacted a law starting in January, very similar to Florida, for all condo buildings, requiring structural inspections and reserve studies, which is the second part of this. Florida has something similar. They, in addition to the inspection and determination of where repairs need to be made, you need to do a reserve study on the structural components, and then you need to fund it. Now, New Jersey has a very similar, that the buildings in New Jersey that are subject to this are like townhouses are not. Like if you have repetitive construction with joists and studs at 16 inches on center and everything's bearing, those are exempt. But anything where loss of a component would cause a collapse, anything that's post and beam, columns, masonry bearing wall, row houses, anything where losing a piece is going to cause a building to collapse as opposed to a light frame construction where you've got such repetitiveness. Those are all required to get the structural inspection, but every single condo association, regardless of the building, the only exception is if the total dollar value of the common elements is $25,000 or less. Every single condo association has to get a reserve study done and has to fund not only future inspections, but also the repairs and some maintenance items. And there's some very specific things in addition to the CAI reserve study standards. So, and the law legislates, like if you're behind, you have a few different options to catch up. But I mean, there's deadlines and timelines and procedures. And, once everyone gets through this first cycle of this, every condo association is going to have their reserves funded and maintain them to be able to fix their building. So we don't run into situations where, like there's buildings in Florida where the assessment is more than the value of the condo. So obviously when that happens, that seriously hampers the ability to repair the building or maintain the building or do anything. So the other part of this is the funding, which is to answer your question, that is probably the most important part of this to change things and actually get things done. It's very easy to inspect something and say, what needs to get fixed. It's actually doing it and paying for it.
That's the challenge. And, and I think about, and Joe, what New Jersey, I guess, like California, right, has a state bills, SB 326 being balcony inspection. But for New Jersey, what does the law refer to for these inspections of buildings?
What's the name or the number on
name and number? And this is good, for the audience to know, just because as these pop up, so different entities.
Go to structuralworkshop.com, all one word, and there's a blog here. It's S2760, which is the Senate, and A4384, which is the Assembly bill. They were combined into the, but we don't really refer to it. That's why I had to look it up. We don't really refer to it like that. Yeah, but that's the actual bill number.
And for those listening that want more information, we'll include that in the show notes so you're able to take a look at the actual bill. And Joe, going back to the parking garage inspection law in New York City, right, as I'm sure you well know, there is a certain classification for, an element or a defect that if it's given, right, the owner has a certain amount of time to actually make those repairs, and they are required to by the DOB, which again, learning from what happened in Surfside is just not something that perhaps was as common before as it is now. Like forcing owners to actually make repairs.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of these, some of the local law 11 and other things. But one of the other things the city's doing right now is trying to get a lot of these sidewalk bridges down. For those familiar with the city, there's sidewalk bridges everywhere, which are to protect people from falling debris if there's a problem. And it's been cheaper for a lot of people to just pay the fines and the rental on the sidewalk bridging than to fix the building. So you had a secondary effect where somebody would, that's the first step is in a parking garage, generally it would be shoring, but on a facade, it would be put sidewalk bridging up to protect the public. So, these facades were being declared unsafe or something's loose and about to fall, and you put up the bridge and then you leave it there for 15 years rather than fix it. So that's a separate effort to fix that situation. But with parking garages, yes, I mean that there's safe with repair and maintenance, which a lot of them fall into. That just means it needs some work here and there. It's nothing dangerous. And then there's unsafe, and if it is unsafe, you have to act immediately to shore it. And then you have a very limited time to make the immediate repairs. Excellent. And that is enforced. I mean, they walk around and fine you and shut you down. And after the garage collapsed last spring, there was a parking garage collapse in the city. That's when they really tightened the standards on this, but they sent DOB inspectors out to all the garages to just do an initial look, just if there's anything really egregious, the DOB inspectors would pick it up and get it addressed.
Absolutely. So, and Joe, with the increasing emphasis on mandatory inspection and repair based on the findings of those inspections for existing buildings, like how do you anticipate this is going to affect our industry, both immediately in the moment, but also over time?
Well, immediately it's a lot of work that has to get absorbed into a, industry that's been pretty busy, for a long time. I think it coincides with some slowdown in new development, due to interest rates and construction costs. And, during COVID, it was rating free money. So everyone was building everything they could. That has definitely slowed down a bit. And, I think this is kind of filling in the void. But from a business perspective, it's a recurring stream. If you do a good job for these owners and clients and managers, the parapets have to be done every single year. The parking garages need an annual inspection. Then every 6 years, they need the full inspection again. So, I mean, it's potentially a suite of clients that just is ongoing on a yearly or 6-year schedule.
Absolutely. And with that, Joe, there's going to be ways that, engineers like you and I are looking to make the process more efficient. Can you talk about the role of technology like drones and rope access and revolutionizing building inspections?
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely more for facades and exterior work than parking garages. But I mean, I still walk around the parking garages with a hammer and a chain, which people laugh at me. And I always make the joke of what my father spent for college and grad school and how long I was there to walk around with a hammer and a chain and hit things, But that still is the best initial screening on a concrete slab, as you know. Right? So, but for facades, yeah, drones are certainly tremendously helpful to look at things up close on roofs and facades. I know on a lot of single family home, like home inspectors use drones all the time because then you don't have to climb up the ladder and go on the roof, and you get great views of single family house from a drone. But it's also good for balconies and facades. I mean, we do a lot of binocular inspections initially, and that's tough to focus and to strain and to look at a whole facade of a building. With the drone, you can see everything up close. You can look at each balcony, top and bottom. So it's certainly a very helpful tool for initial screening, which I think is one of the things you want to talk about, is the difference between an initial visual and something more detailed. But for an initial visual screening, a drone gets you up close access very easily. And some of the stuff we're seeing with rope access for local law 11 stuff is you get riggers that do this. They climb buildings off of ropes, but they have equipment with them now that ties into apps where the engineers can in real time on the ground or in the office see exactly what they're doing, tell them to drill a hole here, because part of the local law 11 requirements require probe holes in certain type, cavity walls. You got to drill into the outer wall and check the ties on a certain prescribed amount per square foot of wall. So, a lot of times the engineers used to go up, they'd have to scaffold the building as swing stages or scaffolding, and you'd have to go up. But now you've got rope access guys coming down from the top and getting very high quality information right to the engineer to make immediate decisions on what to do. So that's helping. There hasn't been too many developments in the parking garage inspection arena. As I said, the visual and sounding is still, and then the other technology that's a little more advanced with scanning and other things has been around for a while. So that's ripe for disruption if somebody can come up with a better way to do that.
Yeah, and Joe and I can speak to it. We've had some guests on the show using still visual techniques, primarily artificial intelligence, computer vision for defect detection. That's, of course, one piece of it. And we'll get into, the phase one visual versus other phases and destructive testing. But there are a number of other types of technologies out there. But it is encouraging because with the mandate of these types of inspections, I think it gives engineers, more room to be able to use still the time-tested tools, a chain, a hammer. I don't think that's ever going away, but honing in on an area where you may need to do like core, probe, other sorts of testing, just based on specific requirements or each engineer's judgment.
Right. Yeah, I was yesterday afternoon. This was a plaster ceiling that had collapsed, and we were checking the other areas. And I was on a ladder with a hammer, and I hit it at the corner where it's tight on the wall, and it's got one sound. And I go out a little bit where it's got a crack, and it sounds totally different. So it's crazy how I guess it's no different than a doctor with a stethoscope. When you've got a CAT scan, an MRI machine right there, and he's got a stethoscope and his little hammer to hit your knee. It's kind of the same thing, but they still do that too.
Yeah, and I just had a nurse take my blood pressure with a stethoscope and the thing they put around your arm with the pump. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, just because we have more sophisticated technologies doesn't mean the tried and true methods go away.
Yeah, no, a lot of inspection work is experience and intuition, and you get a feel for things, and you know what looks. It's not 100% guarantee, obviously, but being experienced and knowing what looks and sounds certain ways and what that leads to, and what seeing that there might mean for there is, that's very important.
Absolutely. So, and Joe, let's hop into the kind of phase one visual versus the subsequent phases. So I know Florida's got a couple of laws that particularly pertain to like that stepping, right? You first start with visual, then based on the findings of that comes something next, depending on what you find. Could you just talk about like how that progression works?
Yeah, we've always done things that way and always recommend it to people. Sometimes it turns them off because you're like, well, we're going to charge you X to do a visual, and then we'll give you a proposal for anything else, and they think you're trying to, pull one over on them. But it's in their best interest because I don't know exactly what or if or what that detailed inspection work is going to be. And it's expensive. I mean, that's the expensive part of this is cores and probes and scanning and things like that. So we always like to do an initial visual, which is exactly what's described for a facade that's going to involve binoculars, going out on balconies, maybe doing a resident survey if anyone's having water leaks or issues, looking in a representative number of units to see if there's any interior problems, but not cutting anything or breaking anything or scanning anything. And then for a parking garage, that's going to be walking through the whole thing, looking at the top and bottom of the slab for spalling, damage, water stains, rust, and then also chain dragging and sounding. That'll try to give us an idea if there's major delaminated areas or not. And then from there, we would figure out what's next. On a facade, it could be cutting off the interior finishes in areas to see what's going on behind it, doing probes to see how the wall's constructed. On a parking garage, it would be cores and testing on the concrete for chlorides and other, the whole battery of tests you can do on the existing concrete. But that stuff would come second because you don't know what you're looking for. You don't know what you're aiming for. You need the phase one in order to develop a plan for the phase two. And sometimes, I'd say often, there is no phase two. So that's the one thing people...
and that's just the thing we explain is like, look, we may look at your structure, right? In the case of something like Local 126, you may just deem it safe. Here's your report.
Yep.
Call us in 5 to 6 years, whatever the requirement is. And you just end up not having to spend the money on the phase two testing.
Yeah. And I think it's can be difficult sometimes for condo boards and owners because they're putting all their trust in you that, you're going to be honest and just say, oh yeah, it's fine. We're done. As opposed to, when you do come back on that rare occasion and say, yeah, it's $40,000 to do phase two and you need to do it or your garage is going to get shut down. I almost want to keep like a log of how many we've done that we've said it's fine and haven't had to go to phase two and include it with the proposal so people don't think that we're picking on them or doing unnecessary work.
And in the case of garages, right? So the DOB publishes that information, and anybody can access that on their website. And I haven't looked at the numbers in a while, but I'd be surprised if a significant amount of them weren't just marked either safe or safe with repairs safe with monitoring.
Yeah, they have the stat. They have a breakdown. I mean, you can look at each garage, but they actually have they've sent out emails and posts at times that have broken down exactly what you described, like the percentage that has fallen under each. Yeah.
So, Joe, thank you so much again for taking the time to join us today. My last question for you is for the engineers just starting out, like in their careers, particularly in this field, like what advice would you give them, right? Because it is a pretty complex field. And as you mentioned earlier, it takes time and experience to really build that intuition.
I mean, I could not have, I feel like I could not have gotten a better education. I got an undergraduate degree in civil engineering and construction management and a master's degree in structural engineering. And I loved my professors. I just, but when you start working, there's so much you don't know. I have an intern that started yesterday, and we're just having that discussion now. Like this is what they taught you in school, but they want you to go to 4 decimal places for your test, but here you stop 3 steps before that and round it up. So we I did not know anything about how an office works or how things are done in the real world or any of that. So it's incredibly important to get the right mentorship and the right training during that EIT period, before you take your PE, preferably. I mean, that's the purpose of it, but look for somewhere where you're not just going to bide your time, so you can write down on the application for your PE that you worked there for 4 years. Look for somewhere where you're going to really learn and really be able to work with an experienced engineer and learn stuff. And the second part is the soft skills. So, engineers are notoriously introverted, right? So it's difficult for a lot of them to communicate and applying communications and writing proposals and networking and all the soft skills. So, I mean, if you want to be in a cubicle for your career and you're happy doing that, that's fine. I mean, there's plenty of people that enjoy just doing calculations and designing stuff. But if you want to get into more of the management side and the business side of it, you absolutely positively have to develop those soft skills and learn enough business skills in terms of networking and budgeting and planning project management, things like that. So those are the missing pieces. And if you can use your 4 to 5 years after school to brush up on them and fill them in and learn that stuff, that's the time to do it. And then you can really start your career when you get your PE.
Very well said, Joe. And if if there's an EIT or somebody coming just out of college that wants to just reach out to you, maybe ask you some more questions based on today's show, what's the best way to connect with you? Sure.
Our website is structuralworkshop.com. My email is joedip@structuralworkshop.com. I'm an email. I don't know what the word is, but I do as much as I can via email. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds a day. So that's my best way to communicate with me.
Beautiful. Well, Joe, thank you again for your time. We appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aectechpodcast.com. There, you will find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering and technology endeavors. Thank you.